Hello, everyone. This is Aaron Stillwell. I'm the owner of the APT and Cybersecurity Group. I want to thank everyone for taking their time today and joining us. Today, we have a great interview today. We are going to be interviewing Bob Ackerman. Bob is the founder of AllegisCyber Capital, and he has extensive experience in seed and early stage cyber startups. Also, Bob teaches new venture finance at the University of California, and he also co-manages his family winery in Napa Valley called Ackerman Family Vineyards. Bob, thank you so much for your time and joining us.
No, look, I really appreciate it. Look forward to the conversation.
Right. We also have helping co-host today. We have David Cross, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at Oracle Cloud, and also Alex Mavro, the Security Manager at Jetronics. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us today.
Absolutely. These are always fun. And we are growing the community. So this should be a fun one today.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. And this is going to be very interesting for me, too, because a lot of my experience have been with the cyber startups. And I love hearing, we've talked to CISOs, we've talked to people written books about the security industry, but I've always wanted to talk to someone from the VC side on their thoughts about the cyber market. So this should be fantastic. So the way I'd like to start it off is, Bob, if you could kind of tell me a little bit about yourself and about Legis Capital, that'd be great.
Sure. Look, and again, I really appreciate you including me in today's conversation. At heart, my educational background is computer science, and I'm actually an operating systems guy. So I kind of grew up in the deeper end of the tech pool, and out of college was to date myself was working in technical marketing in and around the mainframe days, late mainframe days, and then kind of rode the train into workstations, and eventually ended up in operating systems. So, to kind of make it interesting, I was the guy that first put Unix on a workstation, and did that a couple of times. That took me from larger companies into smaller startups. Along the way, had the pleasure of being backed by both NEA and Sequoia. So learned a lot from what I think are two of the best with respect to the venture business. But built the leading Unix systems house in the world, doing operating systems work for 240 computer manufacturers around the world at that point in time. A lot of the advanced development work for AT&T in and around Unix, and subsequently went on and kind of made a pretty interesting pivot in my career for my next startup. Created a company with a good friend of mine called InfoGear. InfoGear is the origins of the iPhone. So if you go to the web and you look for the untold story of the iPhone, this is back in 1995 when we saw the potential to take an 8-bit processor with a micro browser and a micro OS and start to create a generation of internet appliances. And we owned, with National Semiconductor, we owned that seminal patent for the integration of web and telephony. And then we built 2 generations of product that were actually called iPhones. We owned the trademark for iPhone in addition to that core IP. We actually did a prototype for what was called the first notebook product, and ended up selling that company to Cisco for a fair amount of money. And Apple, a few years later, came along with their idea of an iPhone, and of course, in the process, stepped on a whole lot of intellectual property that they did not own, both from a patent perspective as well as a trademark perspective. But through those 2 experiences, really kind of reinforced how much I love working with startups and new ideas, and transitioned to venture capital and launched what is today Allegis, which goes back, we're about 27 years ago now at this point in time. And what's most relevant to the conversation today is for the last 24 years, we've been doing cybersecurity. And the cyber became a bigger and bigger portion of our portfolio. And one of our investors came to me at one point in time, said, "Do you ever think about just doing cyber? And it seems like you're pretty good at it." And we spent about a year thinking about that. in terms of, was cyber as big as we thought it was going to be? Early days, people just thought we were paranoid. My response was, I am paranoid. You should be paranoid too. But the question was cyber big enough to drive a focused venture firm? And at the end of the day, we concluded that it was. But more than the size of the market was really the realization that as the global economy digitizes, that the threats to that infrastructure would digitize as well. So if you look today, I will tell you that what we're seeing with the threat landscape is the digitization of the entire spectrum of bad human behavior. And so we anticipated that with that digital substrate, it would become vulnerable to digital threats. That would be a pretty big idea and a pretty big area. But we also came to the realization that cyber is very complex. It's deeply technical. It moves very quickly. And my conclusion was you can't do this part-time. You have to become a domain master. You need to understand the technology. You need to understand the threats. You need to understand all the players. And you really need to work at it from an inside perspective, even if you're on the investing side. And so that led us at Allegis to actually become the first venture firm in the world to focus on cybersecurity exclusively, raise the first dedicated cyber venture funds. And the last 24 years in cyber have been very, very generous for us. Along the way, another one of our observations was that most of the innovation in cyber actually comes from the offense, and not to offend anyone, but they are what I refer to as the sneaky bastards who wake up every day looking for ways to compromise your infrastructure to achieve whatever their nefarious goals and objectives are. They are highly technical, they're highly motivated, they're well compensated, and they're unconstrained in their behavior. So in cyber, you have this very interesting dynamic where there's an offense, and the offense actually plays an active role in innovation. And so for us, my conclusion was, if you want to build cutting edge cyber defense, get as close to the offense as you can. Understand the offense, understand the offensive playbook. And if you understand that, you'll see that there's a 4 to 6 year lag from a point of offensive innovation to when that innovation will escape containment, basically, and will manifest more broadly in the market. And so we started pulling teams out of the National Security Agency, offensive teams, and tasking them with leveraging their offensive knowledge to build defensive countermeasures. And I used to take those teams out of the fort, move them from Maryland out to Silicon Valley. And about 10 years ago, that playbook really kind of ran its course. I could no longer afford to move engineers from Maryland to Silicon Valley. An engineer coming out of the NSA making $135,000, $140,000 a year, married, has a house, 1 or 2 kids, and there was no way to move those people to Silicon Valley. You could triple their current income, and you couldn't move them to Silicon Valley. Yeah. And so we made a decision to replicate the playbook in Maryland and created a second platform. And that platform is called Data Tribe. And Data Tribe is what we describe as our studio or foundry. And its mission in life, we sit around the corner from the NSA, and our mission in life is to take technical expertise and technical teams that have been honed and developed and funded in national intelligence, really at the cutting edge of offense or related data science, and provide a pathway for them to leverage that expertise to build the next generation of defensive cyber market leaders. And so if you look at companies like Dragos in industrial security, Dragos began at Data Tribe with 3 engineers out of the NSA, core of the NSA's offensive industrial security team. And again, the tasking was, I want you to apply your knowledge with respect to the technology, but also the infrastructure, and think like a hacker and develop the defensive countermeasures. And it's turned out, obviously, we have a company there that's a leader in industrial security. But it's interesting that at the time that we started that company, the conventional wisdom within the venture community, even within sort of the close circle of 10 guys that I respect that really know cyber and have been doing cyber for 20 years, the conventional wisdom was, Bob, you realize there's no industrial cyber market. And my reaction was, that is a historically accurate statement. But if you look at what the offense is doing, those threats will escape from a nation state perspective, will escape containment, will end up in the wild, and we'll have an entirely new vector to worry about, which in fact is what happened.
Of course.
So, my playbook today, early stage oriented, seed and early stage. We tend to look for things that are one of one to the extent that we possibly can, which is why we lean as aggressively on offensive expertise as we can, because that's a place where national intelligence is developing very unique capabilities with very bright engineers, very well funded, so they're able to kind of reduce a lot of the R risk around the innovation and allows us to focus on the D. Our job is to really understand and to be able to anticipate where the next generation of threats are going to come from, what they're likely to look like. But we run those two platforms side by side. So Data Tribe really is national intelligence inspired seed stage financing. There is now a fund behind Data Tribe. And then Allegis is the more classic early stage Silicon Valley based platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to let David and Alex, I know you probably both have questions. I'm going to let you guys, if that's okay, I'll let you guys kind of start it off and I'll go into it too.
Yeah, I'd like to start it off a little bit. And Bob, we always got to make it a little controversial. So I also mentioned that I'm a venture partner with Rain Capital VC, focused on cybersecurity as well. And so one of the elements of the question, I ask you a hard question. Why do so many of the cybersecurity startups all want to be unicorns versus just being great players in a greater ecosystem? I'd love to hear some perspective on that one.
Yeah, look, I think, we all know from an investor's perspective, cyber is a great place to be. It's a big problem. It's a growing problem. It's not one of those areas where investment in cyber defense is discretionary. All of the innovation in cyber originates, in my opinion, on the private side of the ledger. When those companies exit, they principally exit through M&A, which is going to come around to your point. Some will exit to IPO, but it's really hard to run a public cyber company and maintain the pace of innovation that's necessary. It's just very, very difficult. But when those companies exit, even in an M&A environment, they tend to exit at a 30 to 40% premium to core IT companies. So it's a really, really virtuous place to be. I think, kind of coming around specifically to your question, why do they all need to be unicorns? I will tell you, in my playbook, they don't. I don't think there are many cyber companies that actually deserve or can maintain the status of being a unicorn and being a public company. I think that's very, very difficult. I think the challenge is a combination of entrepreneurial ego. That's part of that. The gold standard is I took a company public, and if I'm able to take a company public, I'm a made man or a made entrepreneur. I get that. I think the venture ecosystem has a corrupting impact as well. In terms of it measures, while it should be measuring, performance based on returns, there's that ego aspect, which is, it's got to be a unicorn, it's got to be an IPO. And pragmatically, if we look at the history of cybersecurity, there are not that many IPOs, and I don't expect that to change. Let's understand how the venture ecosystem operates. The vast majority of these companies exit through an M&A transaction. The innovation is in the private side of the equation, right? So what I see is the vast majority of cyber companies will come up with something creative and innovative. It'll be validated in the marketplace, and then it's going to be acquired. Who's it going to be acquired by? It's going to be acquired by a big tech company that has an installed base, whose core business is growing at 3% per year, who looks at cyber as a green field, and they're looking for growth. So they're going to step in, they're going to identify proven innovation, they're going to acquire it, they're going to brand it, put it through their channels to their customers. Now, that looks a whole lot like life sciences and pharma. And so, if you look at how the ecosystem operates, it looks a lot like biopharma, where it's the young startup companies take all the early risk, they've got the domain expertise, they get to a point where they're through their phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials. They basically have vetted the science, and then big pharma steps in and says, we'll take it from here, and they exit at very nice premiums. And then those innovators get integrated into one of the big pharma brands, they finish the phase 3 clinical trials and put it through their distribution channel with their brand behind it. So there's a bifurcation in pharma, which I see happening in cyber as well, which is the private side of the equation drives the innovation. The big public companies looking for growth, just like pharma, step in, acquire, and then put that innovation through their channels. Now, the interesting thing is pharma, the life cycle of a blockbuster drug, tends to usually run the life of the patents. Cyber doesn't have that grace. Cyber's innovation continues to change on an accelerated basis. What that means is when big tech steps in and decides to get into cyber, it's not one and done. It's not, let's make an acquisition and we'll ride that for the next 15 years. They're going to have to continually refresh the stack, which means they keep going back to the innovation ecosystem on the private side of the equation. And that really is where the R&D, the advanced development work takes place. And they are the go-to-market channels. So, I don't think they need to be unicorns. I don't think history tells us, nor would I project that we're going to see a lot of unicorns. I think there are examples. CrowdStrike was a great example. Rubrik, it was able to get out. We'll see how that goes. I think companies like Dragos, where you're leading an entirely new category that's massive, probably there's a large enough opportunity if you have a market leadership position to support a public company. But the vast majority of cyber companies are going to exit through M&A to large tech, and they're going to exit at very nice premiums, if what they're doing is unique and highly differentiated. And I think the venture folks need to, step back a little bit, in terms of pushing some of these expectations. One of my observations we talked about earlier when Allegis decided to focus exclusively on cyber is you can't do this part-time. This is a full-time gig. And it's analogous to if you're in life sciences, can you imagine anybody doing life sciences part-time? It's like, we do e-commerce, we do sharing economy, and we do life sciences. That's a recipe for getting killed. So I think you need to be deeply embedded. You have to be that domain master in cyber. I think part of the challenge we have in the venture ecosystem today as it relates to cyber, and it's not so much a cyber function as it is a venture function, is that wherever the momentum is in the innovation economy, entrepreneurs flock there because that's where they think they're going to make money. And the venture capitalists do the same thing, and in my old, joke was, when an inexperienced entrepreneur and a young venture capitalist meet each other at the bank talking about the future, there is no good news. I think cyber is one of those areas where both the entrepreneur requires deep domain expertise. I know certainly our playbook is your career has to be based in cybersecurity. If you're trying to learn on the job, you're not going to be able to learn fast enough. And the same guidance to the venture community. You have to develop that very deep domain expertise. Otherwise, if one endpoint solution is a good idea, well, why not 12, right? So you end up with a lot of Me Too, undifferentiated technical offerings on their way to commoditization, and that is not how you generate a compelling return, even in an M&A environment. And so I think you need to know the difference between, what is a good idea, what is a great idea, what is highly differentiated, and where are these ideas playing in the marketplace against where the market is. The things we do at Data Tribe, as I said earlier, we focus on one of one. At the time we started Dragos, there was no industrial security market. We anticipated that a market would form based on offense. We've done the same things in and around homomorphic encryption when nobody had really figured out how to make homomorphic encryption work in a way that was scalable. But the NSA had spent a massive amount of money on sorting out the math related to homomorphic encryption. And we were able to pick up some of that technology in that team and use that as a starting point to build what is an Unveil, some would say the leading homomorphic encryption company in the market today. So I think you have to be the ultimate insider to be able to play that game. Otherwise, you're chasing momentum with everybody else. You're competing with the size of the check or the valuation. That all has an adverse impact on building a portfolio and on your returns. So
Alex, did you have some questions?
Yeah, I know that you're a legend. I have read a lot of things about you, about Allegis Capital, about AllegisCyber,
I just get bored easily.
also about Data Tribe and Dragos as well. I know you are a member board, but I still want to know, because you have so much experience, so much knowledge, uh, all these years, based on the, let's say, on the threats that you mentioned. Uh, what you recommend for the public in terms of cyber best practices, and how you recommend, for example, let's say, in order to avoid any, let's say, data breach, data compromise, or even a randomization, for example.
Well, I think I tend to focus on the business to business side of the equation. The consumer space requires entirely different muscles. It's different price points. It's not a segment of the marketplace that I'm particularly comfortable with. There's one exception which kind of crosses the chasm in our portfolio. Out of Data Tribe, we have a company called Black Cloak,
Yeah.
and Black Cloak deals with basically, there's an enterprise solution there, but they also deal with ultra high net worth individuals as well as family offices. So people that normally would be um, uh, protected if they were behind the corporate firewall, but when they leave the corporate firewall, they're still a target because of who they are. So Black Cloak focuses on securing their digital lifestyle, their family, their infrastructure. Because when an executive from Goldman Sachs leaves Goldman Sachs to a determined adversary, they're still a target. They've just stepped outside of that secured perimeter. So that's a case where
I see.
it operates a little bit on the personal side, but very qualified family offices, ultra high net worth individuals, where they will be a target of an adversary. On the business to business side, I segment the marketplace. Uh, you know, I my math usually is Fortune 200 plus or minus, with some adjustments for sector, are have the resources and the technical expertise to secure themselves. And these are the big banks. These are some of the critical infrastructure guys. They've
Yeah.
got the scale. They've got the resources. They can build the teams to basically develop state of the art defensive infrastructure. Once you get past that Fortune 200, and again, some variance based on industry sector, um, in terms of how much how at risk they might be. My belief is that the vast majority of businesses are going to acquire through service providers. So I think you get Fortune 200 plus or minus up to Fortune 2000. This is the domain of MSSPs.
Yeah,
This is
indeed.
where the customer is going to turn to an integrated service provider who is going to be able to get the economic benefit of building an infrastructure that can be deployed across a number of enterprises. And I think that's how they will consume it. When you get down to the SMB space, this again is another category of
Indeed.
MSSPs. And so, my advice, obviously I deal with a lot of Fortune 200 organizations. They all have very sophisticated capabilities. That's who everybody wants to sell to. We can talk a little bit about the dynamic that's going on in the marketplace today, but we have to realize the growing importance, and it will continue to grow, of these distribution channels that are provided integrated solutions to the market. Because if you're Fortune 400, and unless there's a very, very unique set of circumstances, you do not have the resources, nor can you afford the resources to fully secure yourself against the range of threats that you're facing. So you've got to acquire your cybersecurity solution through one of these integrated service providers.
Yeah. Okay. David, would you like to address the next question, or?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a different question. Bob. So certainly, AI is everywhere. We got security for AI, and there's I don't want to call it a bubble. There's 1,000
No,
startups.
no, no. Call it a bubble, please.
Yeah.
Call it a bubble.
I'm not to say in a bubble in a bad way, but it's like there's 1,000. So a lot of companies and enterprises, they're saying, "Hey, we're going to use AI, we're going to use LLMs, but we need security." And there's 1,000 startups.
Yeah.
And I'll be bad and I'll say that a lot of them are looking for, can I have name your favorite analyst company? Can you give me the top 10 I should look at? I can't look at 1,000 startups. Who do I pick? How do we guide enterprises and CISOs on what they should be looking at? Because there's just too many and they can't
Yeah.
evaluate more than one or two.
This really is that bubble phenomena. And again, the bubble phenomena is not unique to cybersecurity. It's a byproduct of the innovation ecosystem. People trying to capture lightning in a jar. What is the next big idea? And it attracts a lot of entrepreneurs who many of, in my humble opinion, probably shouldn't be there. And it attracts a lot of capital by people that probably don't know the difference. And so that unlimited amounts of capital chasing the great new idea with entrepreneurs that are inexperienced is how you get this bubble phenomena. I also say that a lot of what's being labeled as artificial intelligence today is nothing more than rebranded or up-branded machine learning. And there's nothing wrong with machine learning. Machine learning can deliver a lot of value, but whenever the marketeers get involved, we take the truth and we go to the first or second derivative when we start marketing it. And I think we see a lot of that in artificial intelligence today. I will tell you there is a bubble. And I think, what we find, in my experience, having done this for, a fair number of years now and having worked through a number of cycles, is we tend to overstate the near-term impact of technical innovation. At the same time, we understate the long-term ramifications. And right now we are in my opinion, that cycle of overstating the near-term impact. We're still trying to figure it out. We have more questions than we have answers at this point in time. When I see corporations, for example, that are writing, $500-600 million checks to stand up artificial intelligence, research capabilities, either directly or through a company, and what they're really telling you is we just want to learn. I don't mind that just want to learn, but they don't actually know where they're going. So a lot of money is going to be misapplied. A lot of things are going to get funded that should not be funded. I'm actually very, very cautious around artificial intelligence. Let's a little bit of the gas out of the balloon. Let's focus on very specific use cases as opposed to we've got the one be all end all that's going to change everything. So, if you bring that around to cybersecurity, I'm interested in what we can do with artificial intelligence and machine learning around automated defense, for example. Where can we apply the technology to boost the productivity of analysts? How do we use the technology to get to signal, as fast as possible? Those are, I think, are very specific use cases in our domain, cyber, where this technology is going to deliver a lot of value. What doesn't get discussed, and again, I apologize that I come at the world from an offensive perspective, is what about the offensive application of these technologies? And we are wholly unprepared in most cases with the state of our defenses today to counter the offensive application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'll give you an example. A good buddy of mine, Sean Tursky, who was one of the senior leadership at NSA and retired a number of years ago. And before he retired, Sean did a presentation at the Global Cyber Innovation Summit that I chair in Maryland. And Sean said, I want to talk about the offensive application of artificial intelligence. And in that case, he used the OPM breach that many will remember as an example. He says, that OPM breach, the adversary was in the network for 9 months before they were detected. And when they were detected, they had exfiltrated 23.5 million, personnel records, including, security clearance forms and everything else. Huge, huge, huge breach. And Sean used the example. He said, that took 9 months. When we start talking about the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence, that breach event is not 9 months. It's not 9 weeks. It's not 9 days. It's 9 hours. You've been hit. The data's gone, and it's in hours. and where are we with respect to our defensive mechanisms to be able to detect and to remediate against those kinds of threats. That's what we're facing, when we start talking about, I immediately go to the offensive application. I spend a lot of time with offensive people, and when you show offensive people, new technologies, new tools, boy, the creativity that's unleashed with, do you know what we could do with this? Well, the offensive adversary out there, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys, are all wired exactly the same way. And so when I think about things like AI and ML, I come around to, okay, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to be able to get this. We're going to have to be able to separate signal from noise. We're going to have to be able to get much better threat intelligence, in real time, not near real time with high confidence and high fidelity. And then we're going to have to be able to automate our responses, because this is going to turn out to be machine versus machine at the end of the day. And I'll give you an example. There's a technology that originated at the National Security Agency. So we all know, today, network mapping is kind of one of those fundamental, cornerstones of how we secure our infrastructure. And organizations spend a massive amount of money with data feeds, with all sorts of tools, with network security teams trying to map networks. And when I talk to my friends in the CISO community, they'll talk about the fact that, we're spending massive amounts of money. There's one that comes to mind that spends $24 million a year on data feeds. They've got 45 people in their network security operations center, and they license 5 products. And that's all to wrap their arms around, what does my network look like? And, in their private moments, they'll say, and we think we see about 50% of our network. We don't know which 50% because it's dynamic, it's always evolving, but it is an imperfect art, not a science. And even then, he says, reason we've got a big network security team is we're getting 14,500 alerts a week with everything else we're doing, that we're having to crawl through and find the signal in the noise. That's a major problem. That problem gets even more catastrophic when we move from IPv4 to IPv6. The conventional wisdom coming out of national intelligence is that it would be impossible to map an IPv6 network. The estimates were it would take a supercomputer 100 years to map an IPv6 network, right? Which means an hour into the exercise, you've already lost, right? And that's where we're going from a technical substrate perspective, because we need to, but it creates entirely new threats, at the same time, entirely new vulnerabilities. So there's a project that started in national intelligence looking at this problem, and it led to a breakthrough, a mathematical approach to network mapping called computational mapping. And computational mapping really began its life led by a young PhD, Dr. Austin Murdoch, who started working for the NSA when he was 16, who got exposed to this problem, began thinking about how would we solve this problem, and he came up with an approach and actually published a paper called computational mapping, which is a mathematical approach to determining the existence, the totality, the characterization of a network with 100% fidelity, no false positives. That technology now is the foundation of a company called 6map, which is when we get into this world of AI and ML, are the kinds of breakthroughs we need so that I know the totality of my network. I know where I'm exposed. I know what data is exposed at those points of open exposure, and I can now automate the remediation of those exposures. I can turn it over to the machines to, okay, give me a daily report on the totality of my network with high confidence, and then automate my defense against that. And so this is that, kind of spy versus spy mindset, which is the nature of cybersecurity. Good guys versus bad guys. The bad guys will be driving innovation as aggressively as they can because they are unconstrained in their thinking and in their behavior. And we have to be able to anticipate, if we're going to be effective at defense, what could go wrong, where could the offense go, right? And then anticipate where those threats will be and develop effective countermeasures. And so I use 6map as an example of that kind of, came from an offensive perspective has very broad, powerful defensive application, but continues to have offensive application. Imagine you had that capability, and by simply typing in the name of an organization, you could map the totality of their network and their supply chain and understand where the vulnerabilities are. Now you're highly targeted, if your offense going after that particular target. Well, you need the equivalent capability on the
So, Bob, I
defensive
was going to
side
definitely ask you
to be
about
able
when
to
you talk
defend
about
against
the
that
offensive
level of
capabilities, right?
sophistication.
And David talked about this too. I remember when I was with Fidelis, they would talk about you got to be careful talking because we had a lot of military that worked with us. Now, I guess you got to be careful talking about offensive capabilities within a company because of
Yep.
the legal actions if you start taking that route. Is there concern in that? So if you move from obviously we have the NSA, we have the government doing what they need to do, correct? We're not going to say anything more about that. But when they start moving into the commercial space and we start talking about offensive capabilities, how is that? How do you deal with the legal implications if you start kind of moving that direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been one that's been out there for a long time. First of all, I don't do anything on the offensive side. I have a pure
Yeah.
defensive posture. You go onto the offensive side, that's a whole nother world. That's a whole nother lifestyle. You end up living on an island surrounded by Navy SEALs to keep you alive. I kind of like fly fishing too much to kind of buy into that. But I think what you can do is develop an offensive mindset. What I mean by that is understanding where the offense is going, understanding how the offense is going to come at your defense, and use that to inform the development of your playbooks. I think, when we talk about how we characterize these things inside of
Yeah.
enterprises, we stop saying
Okay, it
offense,
looks a
just
little
started
better
saying
on
active
paper.
defense, it just looks a little better because look, from a legal perspective, the line between
Yes.
offense and defense is one of those very, very active areas of discussion, in Washington, D.C., in terms of what steps can you take, in as a matter of self-defense, and where do you cross over the line? And I will tell you, most organizations that I deal with, and I can't really think of an exception today. They don't want to be in the offensive business, right? They just want to secure their estate. They just want to be able to operate their business. They're not, quite frankly, much to the chagrin sometimes of law
No.
enforcement. They're not
Yeah.
even that interested sometimes in
They
in,
just want to
in
build the wall
attribution.
and have the best
I
wall
stopped
possible
it,
to be able to
right?
block
That's my
and
job,
then
is
keep
to
the
stop.
safety in.
That's exactly right. Now, yeah, now I'm going to argue that collaboration with select resources in the U.S. government is actually a very good thing, because look, if we're all trying to defend ourselves on our own, game set match, adversary wins. There's a reason why in the Middle Ages we built villages, right? That was the fortification that secured the community. So we have a lot of that in cybersecurity. We have the ISACs. Things we do at GCIS are about pulling Fortune 200 systems together in a closed room environment to share experiences and talk about threats. But we need to continue to enhance the communal collaboration aspect of what we do, so that we can share knowledge and experience. If an adversarial group, let's say it's a criminal
Of
adversarial
course.
group, is going after a bank, they're not going to stop at one bank. They're going to go after all the banks. They're going to go after all the banks with the playbook. So the banks talking about what they're experiencing, where they're getting hit, where they're exposed, how they're responding, sharing that experience with the rest of the community has a significant positive impact. I think we can see a lot of that, some of the same benefits in collaboration with the government. The FBI has gotten much more aggressive. They've got their CISO boot camp, which I recommend to, I've gone through it, spent a week with them kind of
Yep.
talking about tradecraft, what their capabilities are, how they work with industry. It really opens up your eyes in terms of what kinds of relationships and resources are available. I think CISA has gotten much better, over the last 4 or 5 years. I think you find the NSA, which never used to talk about these things, really combining their efforts and their knowledge with other elements of government to make their expertise available to the marketplace. because my conversations going back years has been, look, if there's a nation state adversary coming at us, they're not going to go at our hardened infrastructure, right? They're going to go after the soft underbelly. They're going to find the easiest place to compromise our infrastructure will have the greatest impact. And when you understand that, all of a sudden you get to the fact that we can't be trying to figure this out on our own.
Yeah.
We need to be pulling together. We need to be communicating.
Definitely, I think the example about collaboration is one thing. So certainly, I think as the communities, certainly we know like with banking, they all go after each other. Retail, healthcare, things like that. Certainly, that's where I think FS ISAC is really valuable, right? And what I'm involved is the IT ISAC, the critical SaaS special interest group, right? The SaaS providers, like how we share. And I think it's the analogy sometimes is we may be competitors, but we also have common enemies, right? And so how we work together and sharing that in a safe way is really, really important to the community.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And there's there's been sort of an evolution in the thinking over the years, right? At one point in time, it's like I just want the bad guy not to come here. He can go after one of my competitors. The old joke about you don't you don't need to be faster than the bear. You just need to be faster than the slowest person. And there was a little bit of that, right? Yeah, exactly right. There was a little bit of that, but I think as the community has matured, again, they understand that adversaries, when they launch campaigns, they're going to go after a characterization of infrastructure, a characterization of business type, and so the sharing of that information is very, very important. You talk about a great example was what the electric utilities did. Kind of go back to industrial. I will give credit to some of the things that have come out in the last few years, where the White House basically tasked critical infrastructure with come up with a security plan for your segment of critical infrastructure, and there are 16 areas that are identified as critical infrastructure today. And the utilities, they gave them 100 days to come up with their plan. And the utilities, Tom Fanning, who was the CEO of Southern Company, really helped shepherd a lot of that through. But they sat down, the thought leaders in the electric utility space. Now, they had already had a history of collaborating because they don't compete. They are geographic monopolies, right? So they already had a history of collaborating to ensure, resilience in the electrical grid, that if somebody failed, their counterparties could fill in for them. So they had that history of collaboration, but they sat down in 100 days, came up with, this is what we're going to standardize on. And that was a voluntary standard, but it came from within the industry saying, who do we know? Who do we trust? And they put that standard in place. There's other examples where you have real challenges. Look at threats to water infrastructure. If you look at water operators in the United States, you're talking about 6,000 water systems, most of which are very small. They may or may not have an IT person, and yet they are at risk to cyber attacks. And we've seen a couple of these examples by bad actors going after infrastructure. Who's going to secure them? And so that requires, a level of collaboration to kind of pull them together. Governments have to get involved in making sure that they have the resources and they have the expertise. The guys at Dragos, understanding this problem, said, look, we will give our technology to anybody under 100 million in revenue. We'll give you the technology, right? Because you need to be secure. We know you don't have the resources to buy. You may not have the expertise to deploy. We will make this available to you. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Again, it's on a sector by sector, business by business basis in terms of what that collaboration looks like. But the collaboration is absolutely essential. Look, we go into the dark web. Look at that marketplace. Look how sophisticated that market is. There's a marketplace for tools for hacks. You want to hack as a service. You want to pay for success. Look, I want a campaign targeting XYZ bank, and I will pay X dollars per compromised credential. The adversaries collaborating, very, very sophisticated collaboration. What makes us think going it alone, we're going to be able to stand up against that? We're not.
But what about industrial on the railway? Because you haven't mentioned that part. For example, in the railway, we don't have most of the companies. And for example, in Europe, I could tell you a lot of companies that they don't have security, or if they have security, there are two, three people for the entire, let's say, uh, company, which is not enough because
Look, I think this is part of the learning curve, right? Whoever,
yeah,
the water plants never thought that they were at a risk from a cyber attack. They have subsequently learned. The rails are going down the same pathway. I've got Dragos in my portfolio has got rail customers. Never thought of it. They never thought of it. The rail customers came to them when they realized, and there was probably some national security impetus to thinking about that's critical infrastructure. That infrastructure needs to be secure
yeah. But
because so much
the main problem
critical
over there,
freight
I
moves
can tell
on
you
rail in the
one thing
United States.
because I have some
It's
experience from another friend of mine who's working into that. Is that you cannot do the patching whenever you want.
boy. Look,
Yeah,
this is go back to petrochemical, right? I mean, an area where I've got a fair amount of example and petrochemical critical infrastructure. Uh, you know, uh, Very, very exposed. You look at the Middle East. You look at the times, the twice that I can talk
yeah,
about where Iran went after Aramco and SABIC, right? And thinking about how do you secure against that, because these petrochemical processing facilities are very complex machines, right? Who generate revenue by running 7 by 24,
yeah,
365, and you don't get take the plant down to patch, right? And so you need to understand the dynamic of that environment. You need to understand where the vulnerabilities are, and you need to develop deep expertise in terms of how are we going to secure that infrastructure. I think one of the really interesting things about OT is all of the folks in the IT space who would like to come into the OT market. Now, the OT market historically has not been a great one for venture capitalists. Why? Because
yeah,
it's the static. It's a massive industry, right? But again, now you go to a petrochemical facility and it's like, look, we take that facility down when we do major maintenance. It's scheduled years in advance. The plant will be down for months to a year, right? And that's the window of opportunity. A startup can't be waiting around for that window of opportunity. It's like the challenges of a startup trying to sell to the federal government with a 3-year procurement cycle. That just doesn't work with what a startup needs to do to validate its solution in order to secure its next round of financing. And then when you get in industrial, you find who are
yeah.
the big
I know.
players historically. Well, they're the Rockwells, the Emersons, the Honeywells, the Siemens, right? Large, they've got mass, they're synchronized
Yeah,
with the cycle of industrial. And now along comes cyber, right? And those big industrial suppliers, they don't have the expertise, they have the customers. And so you've got a market that really is trying to find itself and figure out how it's going to do. But many of the people in that segment never thought
indeed.
about security. Security in the industrial sector was physical security. It's secure the plant from a physical attack or a physical compromise. The culture of the engineers in the OT environment, very, very capable engineers, but you get the culture of an OT engineer versus the culture of an IT engineer. I
And
used
they
to
differ too
I
much. I
laugh. I
know.
won't talk about the big petrochemical company. Yeah, and I remember having a conversation. He said, "Well, corporate is I said, "Well, what about those corporate
Yeah,
standards?" He said, "Yeah, that's great. I'm sure they're very proud of themselves, right?" He says, "We run the machines that generate the revenue that support the
yeah.
company,
I know.
and the plant manager in industrial is God." And everybody else is a footnote. So you get this really interesting dynamic in industrial between IT and OT. Very, very different cultures. I
You're
once
right
heard
there.
you've got OT engineers, they're steel-toed boots and jeans, and they're all very sophisticated engineers. And they talk to the IT guys, and it's like, yeah, you and your loafers and your chinos and your carpeted, air-conditioned space with your spreadsheets. I mean, there's this condescension between these two communities. And that needs to be
Sure.
resolved, because at the end of the day, the adversary is going to find where you're vulnerable, whether it's on the IT side or on the OT side, they're coming at you. And so you're going to have to develop a unified approach you go back and you look at Colonial Pipeline when that happened, right?
True.
Ransomware going after the IT infrastructure, right? Well, what did they do? They shut down the pipeline because they weren't sure about isolation. And could it spread to the pipeline? So out of an abundance of caution, they shut the pipeline down. And we saw the consequences of that. So it was a simplistic ransomware attack on IT infrastructure that ended up shutting down OT infrastructure. So, we got a lot to figure out. These are very, very complex systems. And again, our massive push towards digitization, we're doing it for all the right reasons. We want to be faster. We want to be more efficient. We want to be more competitive. But our ability to deploy digitization is far outstripping our ability to secure digitization.
Yeah.
And look, we saw that in July with CrowdStrike and Microsoft, right? That wasn't an attack. That was just, these systems are very complex. They're very big. They're very brittle, right? And they are
Can you
not
imagine
tolerant
CrowdStrike on the PLC?
to the unexplained or the unexpected.
Wow.
Or the historian goes down. That's where the danger comes in.
Well, this is right. This is where I say I think that, there's a lot of folks in the IT space that want to get into the OT space that I don't think fully appreciate how totally different. I mean, everything is different now. Some of the IT creeping into the OT space, that's inevitable, and there'll be some unification that takes place as a result of that. But you start getting down to those
field devices,
down to the controllers and the protocols and the level of field automation. That is a totally different world
actually
than anything they've experienced in the IT
the
space.
CISA has fantastic training. So they have the 300 and 400 level all free training that you could do in certifications with them. And honestly, it's an eye opener. I mean, I've had experience in this field before, but the merger of IT and ICS networks through the PLCs and the field devices and the historians and then the backups and everything else, it's made it an absolute nightmare for these organizations because now they have a way to get in the door. And now they got to worry about firewalls and IDSs and IPSs and securing each point, and how we segregate the networks from the ICS network to the IT network. And I can imagine for a lot of these organizations, it's been an absolute headache. And then you have old school OT, like you talked about, who are used to, changing their DCS every 15 years, doing upgrades that way.
Let's not forget about the others. I mean, IoT, for example, IoT is something that is Internet of Things, but that is used, for example, for automotive, and is also used in the industrial. Because over there we have IoT, for example.
And you have an IoT cameras in there.
Yeah. Well, look, we're always in the name of advancing. We're always driving the adoption of new cutting edge technology. And security is that secondary consideration after the fact. I think this is where the secure by design concepts really come into. It's like, don't deploy anything until it's secure, because everything is vulnerable. Everything is a target. And so when you're deploying new capability or new infrastructure, you have to assure yourself that security of that infrastructure is just as important as the functionality of that infrastructure, and you can't deploy until it is proven to be secure. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the insurance guys are going to back away. You're going to be uninsurable. You're going to have to self-insure, and you're going to bear the full consequences of getting it wrong. I think it's another one of those kind of themes in this area. I mean, look, industrial can keep us going for hours, right? But you look at how people, one of the great things, if there's a great thing, a good thing, a constructive thing that came out of July, was the understanding it's not just cyber threats. Yeah. It's about the resilience of your digital infrastructure. And so the problem that we're tackling and the market opportunity that we're discussing is actually larger than just cyber attacks. It's about the resilience of that infrastructure. Can it be counted on? Can it be depended on? And that takes you down a whole nother set of thoughts. Things that I think about that we talked a little bit about in advance is, what about weaponized data? What happens when you're running digital infrastructure and the efficacy of that digital infrastructure comes down to the veracity of the data? What happens when data is weaponized? That's a threat. It's going to be a threat. Now that's a huge data problem. And that's a very complex problem, goes deep into the data science. And you look at how many people
Maybe
have
five.
expertise on
Yeah.
problems like that. You can count them on a couple hands. And some of it actually, some of it actually is national intelligence. You look at posture management. Look at what we do today in terms of trying to understand our cyber posture. Right now, if you're reporting to the regulators, if you're putting questionnaires together for the insurers, if you're reporting to the board, a lot of times it's a lot of questionnaires completed with anecdotal data into Excel spreadsheets. It's like, what could possibly go wrong, right? There's no ground truth involved, and it gets done once a year. And we know that cyber threats evolve from moment to moment, so we've got to rethink that whole posture management. We've been working on a project for a number of years about what does that solution look like, and my contention is we have all the data. The data exists. We have all the log data is out there. We need to be able to take the log data, integrate it, deduplicate it to give me a holistic integrated view of my cyber estate. Put that in what I call the Cyber Information Center, repurposing CIC from the Navy, which is the repository of ground truth. And now against that repository of ground truth, I want to be able to run, am I running NIST? Am I running MITRE? What filters or protocols or standards am I running against that data set? And then I can report out to the regulators. I can report up to the board. I can report out to the insurers, all off the same data set. But we need that ground truth, because right now we're making decisions about prioritization of resources, whether it's financial resources or human resources. We're making budget decisions, and we're making it off anecdotal data with very little ground truth. That is not how we win this game at the end of the day. And so I think you're going to see, I think as the regulators get more aggressive, I think they're going to play a more active role in terms of what is expected. And I think the government's going to get involved as the ultimate backstop in insurance. And so they're going to be able to come at this from a regulatory perspective and an insurance perspective to drive behavior around transparency and visibility. And then we need to put that as close to real time as we possibly can, because this once a year stuff is that ain't going to get us. I sit on a number of boards, and give me our cyber posture. Where are we against our peer group? How do we measure that? Where do we need to be? You need more budget. What are we going to get for that? This is now a major expense area where boards, really with not just a cyber hat on, but a risk hat on, are going to begin asking for a lot more data, much tougher questions as part of their oversight duty. And that's going to be very similar to where the insurers are going to come from. It's going to be very similar to where the regulators are to come from. So we have an opportunity around the cyber posture management to really advance the state of the art. And the bulk of the problem actually is a data science problem. It's taking all the data that exists and integrating it and making sense out of it. And then we can begin to layer the filters on top. So, but there's so many. Look, insider threat, right? I mean, I tackled insider threat 10 years ago. Insider threat still turns out to be a component of 70 to 75% of cyber breaches have an insider component to it. 10 years ago, I ran headlong into HR departments as you can't surveil our employees. Well, I'm not trying to surveil the employees. I'm trying to monitor for bad behavior, where people are either making mistakes or doing something silly. I think we're going to see a major, acceleration of interest in insider threat. I think we're going to be more sophisticated about how we do it, but the ability to be able to say, hey, we got a hygiene problem here, or we have a serious threat here, or we've got a training problem here. But it's, the insider threat really is that intelligence network that tells you where to focus your effort to become more secure. And when you realize that 70, 75% of cyber events have an insider component, I can't imagine a higher priority
That's
than making sure the hygiene internally is squared away.
So, a lot of solutions, they offer endpoint solutions for insider threat. or they're looking to more on the network side. Have you seen where there's getting so many endpoints deployed? Companies are at the point, especially with what happened with CrowdStrike. They're at the point they're getting a little nervous of deploying these solutions on the endpoint, and then you're going to add another one for insider threat to be able to say it's doing machine learning and analyzing and looking for behavior. What do you see a different direction kind of moving with that within the insider threat to how to be able to detect behavior that's not normal? Say someone is about to get fired or let go, and they start grabbing information that way. Have you seen it where new technologies are kind of coming out the way to deal with that? Yeah,
So there are so yeah, I mean, death by 1,000 endpoints, right? It's like, and every one of those endpoints actually turns out to be a point of vulnerability.
yeah,
Let's not forget that, right? I mean, that's an entry point into a network, right? So
yes,
endpoints can be a really interesting approach to how do I instrument and collect data, but there's a downside to that as well. Interesting. I without mentioning names because I really can't. I see really interesting work being done in network mapping. A lot of the network mapping work has been outside in. So this is where the security scorecards and the bit sites and the Qualisuses, the Tenables tend to operate. 6map, quantum breakthrough in technology in terms of being able to get 100% fidelity in those networks and then lay the foundation for automation. But I see similar approaches being applied to inside out in terms of how do we map those networks and monitor those networks internally
yeah,
without an endpoint. And a lot of these models are mathematical, which is interesting, which is why so much of this originates in places like the NSA.
oh yeah,
NSA's got really good cyber folks, but it's got a lot of
of
really good
course,
mathematicians. And cyber and math are two sides of the same coin. At the end of the day, so I think we're going to see some significant breakthroughs there. It's just a matter of there is no shortage of areas for innovation. I get asked the question, and you guys haven't asked yet, so I'll ask it for you: Is cyber overinvested or underinvested? Right? And my answer is yes. And it's like, well, which is it, Bob? I said it's actually both. So, well, how can it be both? I said, look, the Me Too undifferentiated commodity stuff, grossly overcapitalized. That's what happens when the venture herd meets the entrepreneurial herd. They all want to be in cyber. And this is where, there are 10 endpoints out there. Another one, ours is 5% better, 10% less costly. Grossly overcapitalized. That's going to be cannon fodder. That's all going to be rationalized in the current market. The stuff that's going to move the needle, the stuff that's over the horizon, that really is going to make a difference and make us more secure long term, grossly undercapitalized. And why is that? Because there aren't enough domain masters. There aren't enough people that really understand how threats evolve and where the threats likely are to develop in the future, that can anticipate, that are close enough to the offense to be able to, I sit down
yeah,
with the guys in the NSA and we talk about weaponization of data. We have very interesting conversations, right? And you take a lot away from those conversations.
yeah,
And these are just thought exercises. This is not anybody giving away tradecraft, but you begin to think of what keeps you up at night. And what if I had a conversation a number of years ago with a major data provider to the investment community, and they were talking about how they deploy all of their data. They used to deploy their data through terminals and books, and now they deploy it all with digital feeds. And so digital feed
yeah,
comes in, integrates into an automated trading system, trades at the speed of
yeah,
light, and they are rightfully proud, right? This is the flyboys stuff, right? High frequency trading, and I'm the guy saying, how do I trust the data? Because if the data has been corrupted, things go to hell at the speed of light, right? And it doesn't take a lot of manipulation to corrupt the data. In fact, you can totally corrupt the data to manipulate outcomes, or you can corrupt the data to a point where you erode the confidence in the systems. And now you can no longer use those systems. They're no longer relying on those systems. Look, in
Of course.
military tactics, we used to use disinformation as a tactic,
Yeah.
right?
No,
Why
and
not
one,
apply
I know
that to a
we're a
digital
little bit
landscape?
over. Is everybody okay with
So,
time? I just want to make sure. Okay. David, are you okay? Or
I gotta close pretty soon,
I'm
but
good.
okay.
you
I
know,
actually wanted to ask both of you a question. I know both of you as your investors. We had Richard Steinen on, who wrote all of the security yearbooks, right? And I read his last book before we came on.
Yep.
And what's amazing to me is the actual number of startups and companies in even the cyberspace coming out. It is enormous. And a lot of them, obviously, some of them do well, some of them don't do well. I've worked startups for many, many years, and I could go into a million reasons why they don't. But I would love to hear from both of you as investors and working with these companies. What do you see when you look at these companies? Why are they successful, and why do some of them fail?
Boy, I don't think it's any different in cyber than it is in other sectors. Quite frankly, I think cyber, it's harder to get it right because I think it requires a foundation of domain expertise. But like I think there are too many people chasing legitimate problems with too little expertise, with too easy access to capital. I think we're going through a great rational. And again, what are the venture guys? How do the venture guys help or hurt in this process? They want to go out when they're out raising their next fund. They want to
Yeah.
talk to their LPs about all the cool cutting edge stuff they're doing. They're on the absolute forefront, and so they've got their tick list. I got to have my AI guys. I got to have my cybersecurity guys. Whatever is the theme of the day, right? They want to have that in their portfolio, and so there is an element of discipline that breaks down in their selection of opportunities, particularly if they don't have the domain expertise to identify a good idea from a bad idea. So you get, again, too much of the Me Too, undifferentiated commodity stuff. If you look at the market today, people, right, and I think it's stratified into three strata. The companies that are killing it, right, that just they've got a big problem, they've got a great solution, they've got solid efficacy, they've got a machine that just functions really, really well. You've got at the bottom strata, you've got the curd. You got the companies that, this ain't going to make it. This ain't going to raise more financing. It needs to get rationalized some way. That rationalization may be it gets shut down. It may be, three dogs get cobbled together to see if they can somehow move up to the middle strata. But those companies are going away. And that's a good thing. That's part of the cleansing process of the ecosystem. And the middle strata is what I call the milk, right? They're trying to figure out if they're going to move up to cream or if they're going to become curd. And they're fighting for survival. And they're fighting for survival in an environment where the capital market, has become much, much, much more difficult. I was having a conversation with a major investment bank friend of mine earlier this summer, and we talked about a conversation 2 years ago, and they were saying, well, don't you think every venture firm can do cyber? And I said, nope, don't think they can, just like I don't think every venture firm can do life sciences. I think you have to have domain expertise. You need that unfair competitive advantage. And they came back to me and said, you were right. We thought they were all out talking about how they could do it. And we said, well, it's deal flow. They've got networks and they can't. And I said, what is convinced you of that? Says they've all pulled back from the market. When the markets get tough, when they get really challenging, the people that understand the market and understand the nuance and believe they can find value in that confused, chaotic environment, they will stay the course. The ones that can't, pull back.
Yeah.
And so what's happened in the venture finance ecosystem is many of the people that 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago would have been writing check after check after check for cyber have retreated, realizing this is a little more complicated than we thought it was. And so what that means is there are fewer people with less expertise, with available capital to support that large ecosystem of cyber companies that are stratifying, which reinforces the curd going away, the milk having to sort itself out, and capital flowing to those clear market leaders.
Yeah. David, did you want to?
Yeah.
I have time, guys. I just want to make sure you're okay.
I'll throw in one last thing, or a different angle of things, like is that I'm always thinking from an enterprise mindset. So I think the successful startups are one when it's simple. If it's complex and difficult and things like that, it's gonna be hard to be viral. You got to be simple and quick. The second is really integrating with enterprise. Make sure you understand the enterprise, and you've got to integrate with it. Make it simple. If you don't plug into Jira, guess what? It's not going to work, right? It's not going to go anywhere. And the third one is, I know this is, it bugs a lot of people, but really is CISOs always have money when it comes to audit and compliance. You can't fail a PCI audit. You can't fail FedRAMP. You can't fail SOC, right? In the deadlines, you can't miss them. And so sometimes how you can help them to solve audit, costs and overhead and resources, that means the money's always going to be there because you can't fail those things. So that's my tip of the week.
Dave, those really, really good points. If I was giving a piece of advice, to go back to why companies succeed and fail, too many cybersecurity companies lead with their technology. I will tell you, the CISO
not with solving a solution.
CISO doesn't care about your technology.
Yeah.
Align yourself with the CISO's problem priorities.
Yep.
And talk about how you take away that pain. Eventually, they'll get to how do you do that. That conversation will come up, but do not lead with your technology. Lead with the problem to a solution that's keeping them up at night.
Because they only know how to sell specs and features, and not solving problems.
Well, and this goes back to I think in general, broad sweeping statement, the immaturity of the business skill set in the cyber community. We're strong on technology. We're really strong on technology. But so many of those strong technologists were most recently strong technologists. They weren't building a company. They weren't thinking about go-to-market. They weren't thinking about sales ops. They weren't thinking about customer success. Those are all new skills, right? And when they need those skills, they tap into the gene pool that has those skill sets. But that gene pool all too often doesn't have the cyber expertise.
Yeah.
But even for the technology, you have to use a framework like NIST, for example.
Yep.
So that's another important point, and that people has to check it to see if it's compliant to those controls, to what you have implemented for your critical infrastructure that you have mentioned.
Well, and on top of that, look at the operational complexity, right? David, I don't know what your stack looks like, but the banks that I work with, 120, 140 products, that wasn't by choice. That was out of necessity, right? They needed the coverage, they needed the capability, and what's happened as a result of that? All of that broad suite of tools adds operational complexity, which translates to risk, right? That they have to manage, and this is what drives kind of the vendor consolidation push. Now, do I actually think if I take a major bank, the number of vendors is going to go away? No. I think the configuration is going to change. There's going to be a lot of functionality that standardizes. There's an old cycle that I talked about years ago in terms of innovation that leads to emulation, that leads to componentization, which leads to commoditization. That will happen in security. And so if you take the 120 tools in Bank X's stack, right, as that definition of work is defined today, it will compress to fewer moving parts. There will be the inevitable consolidation, fewer moving parts. But at the same time, there are entirely new threat vectors that are going to materialize, that are require adding new capabilities to the stack. So I think they're going to be stuck with that complexity, but just because of the very lively nature of cyber threats. But when you're approaching a CISO, not only is it understand their problem that keeps them up at night, talk about how you can simplify their environment, how you can remove operational complexity, because that actually drives a cost efficiency, but it reduces risk.
Yeah. So did you
guys want to go for another hour?
This is great stuff. I mean, Bob, thank you so much.
I love the conversation. Great questions, guys. Great conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys, Alex, David, do you guys have any more questions or?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Many people are afraid of losing jobs, and we are talking about people that are maybe in the offense, or maybe in the threat intel, or even people that are, let's say, taking care of the audit and compliance that David mentioned before, or let's say people that are in the part of the GRC. Of course, I have mentioned already compliance, but here we have part of the governance and risk. uh, if the AI is coming, um, and we know very well that already the AI somehow is helping some of these teams, but somehow other companies find a way to, let's say, for the threat intel, to change their world in order to put the AI instead of putting a person behind of this. What you recommend? Because what those people will do in the next years. I mean, I'm seeing already, for example, in the online, so many companies that are already providing a part of the threat intel. For example, Recorded Future. It's a big company, and we know very well. And not only that one, is Bitdefender behind as well. Is Mandiant as well. So we have quite many companies. What those people will do if the AI will come and take their jobs?
Well, look, to be brutally honest, it's adapt or die. The nature of cyber is continuous, innovation and evolution of the threats. And so, out of necessity, we're going to use more automation to get better at certain tasks. And so the people that have built their careers there are going to have to evolve their skill set. There's not going to be any reduction, in my opinion, in the overall need for talented people, but the skills required are going to evolve.
Yeah,
And deploying things like ML and AI on threat management, threat mitigation, threat detection, we have to do that. Otherwise, game set match, we lost. So we
yeah,
have to do that. We have no choice. Does that mean that the people that were doing that job, they either need to learn, upskill to use the new
Yeah.
tools,
Yeah.
right? Or redefine their skill set to pick up some of the tangential areas.
Yeah.
So, we
I think
still look.
that's a great point, Bob.
You look at
Talking
all the automation we've had over the last 20 years, and we're still down 4 million people in terms of open jobs looking for people, right?
about,
And
yeah.
so is there going to be local disruption? Yeah, there's going to be local disruption by function, where AI, for example, or machine learning are particularly effective, but there are going to be entirely new areas that are going to require skills.
I'm sure we'll have a new era. I mean, if in the past the era it was to, let's say, to evolve the technology, now I think technology will evolve more than us, more than the humans, and
Well,
that might be a problem in the
that
future.
look, that's a very real risk, because now you talk about, our push to deploy cutting edge innovation to gain efficiency and margins and all of that good stuff,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
fact that security is always trying to catch up. Now automate that process, and we will fall even further behind, in our ability to keep pace with it and keep guide rails on it. You hear Elon Musk talking about the threats from artificial intelligence.
oh yeah.
You
Indeed.
know, it's the problem is that we are limited in our ability to anticipate. When we automate, we will discover where the limitations of our imagination are, and you just hope the consequences aren't catastrophic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm looking to Japan. I'm looking to China in terms of technology, how much they evolved in terms of robots, and yeah, it's surprising. It's like science fiction. I mean, I remember in '90s when I was looking to movies, and now it becomes reality. We see things like that were in Star Trek, for example, or other type of movies, and
Well,
I don't know what to say.
if you put all this into a context of military tactics, what is sort of at the top of the pyramid today, in military tactics, unconventional warfare. Now
Yeah,
apply to cybersecurity. Who are the
Yeah.
yeah,
hackers? They're the unconventional warriors.
Yep.
indeed,
Yep. They
indeed.
are.
We have one question from one of the LinkedIn user. May I address Aaron?
Yeah, no, please go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so the question was, what are the your top recommendation for the offensive teams regarding cybersecurity?
So tell me more on the question. So is it, what should offensive teams be thinking about? They don't need any advice from me. They're really, really good. but
Okay, okay.
but I will tell you, look, there is a reason.
Mhm.
There's a reason why major institutions with security teams recruit from
Yeah,
places like the National Security Agency,
I
right?
see.
They're
Yeah,
recruiting offensive perspective and expertise. Offensive people just think differently. You know,
it is.
there is an asymmetry in cyber.
Yeah,
And you know, the offense is on the asymmetric side. The defense is always reactive. You know, we need to make that as symmetrical as possible, which means we need to think like the offense. We need to be able to anticipate where, you know, Wayne Gretzky had this famous quote, the Canadian hockey player, and people said, "What makes you so good?" He said, "Well, hockey players skate to where the puck is." And Gretzky says, "I skate to where the puck is going to be." That's
yeah,
the way we need to approach cyber. We need to be able to anticipate where the adversary will engage, which means the ability to think like a hacker, to understand where's the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure, because they will find the vulnerabilities. They're
yeah,
masters of finding the vulnerabilities and figuring out how to compromise them. So, you know, the best defense, you know, is informed by offense. So.
yeah. And we have another question from another LinkedIn user.
I'm
How's
sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. I know we went a
please?
little long there, and I apologize. I do have to drop. So
Let's
I
do let's
really
do this.
enjoyed it very much,
Let's do
everybody.
this again, okay? This was a good
So,
conversation.
so you guys can continue on. I do have to drop though, unfortunately. Thank you.
Yeah, it's again, Bob. It's up to you, but David has a drop. Is that
Thank you.
okay?
That's all good, David. Thanks for
Okay,
talking to
David.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
Thank
much
you,
as
Thank you,
always.
David.
Very
All right,
nice.
well, let's
Thank
get
you.
this last question in.
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. So the last question it is from a LinkedIn user. How soon can we anticipate anti-quantum cryptography becoming a cybersecurity standard for industrial applications? That's a good question.
So very, very topical. The people that I work with in national intelligence are doing a lot of work around post-quantum encryption. You know, now is the time, you know, to be looking at post-quantum encryption and deploying post-quantum encryption or quantum-resistant encryption. Now is the time. You know, I think we're all aware of the fact that, you know, particularly by nation states, a lot of the data that's being stolen is encrypted data, but it's being stolen and warehoused in anticipation of quantum being able to eventually decrypt it. And that really is focused on, you know, deep intellectual property, trade secrets, intelligence, things of that sort. But you know, we're actually I was at the NSA 10 days ago, and we're doing work on for Global Cyber Innovation Summit in February, and this is one of the subjects you know that we're talking about. We talked about it last year as well, which is, you know, now is the time to be implementing your quantum resistant strategies now.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, you know, we can all argue about, you know, when the quantum capabilities for decryption will be there. Nobody's going to give you a straight answer. You have the vendors, you know, who are developing technology. We'll talk about when they'll have their capabilities. You have national intelligence, which is very sophisticated and very capable. That's not going to tell you, you know, what their capabilities are. But you know what you can get universally is now is the time to deploy quantum resistant technologies.
Yeah,
Now,
I was gonna ask because it seems these quantum computers definitely to build them only nation states at this point.
At the moment, yes, but
Well,
in
yeah,
the
because you're
future,
you're dealing with qubits,
yeah,
superimposition,
exactly,
stuff like this. I mean,
exactly.
it's and cooling down to a very low degree to be able to kind of control it. And but do you see it? Do you see it moving towards smaller, maybe nation states as more of a threat
yeah,
building
yeah,
up
it
to it
will
than it's
because
even possible?
because look, the phase that we're in today is the research phase, and
Yeah.
it's like the hard science phase. You know, I talk to guys working on quantum, and it's like, how does it work? Like, UC Santa Barbara, where a lot of Google's quantum work's being done.
Yeah.
You talk to people about how does it work? Well, we don't really know. We just observe the behavior.
We do not
We
know,
work with the observed behavior.
we don't
right?
know how the qubits work. We really don't.
We don't know. We don't know why and how.
But we know it does.
We just know they behave in a prescribed fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, and the implications are going to be phenomenal, not just for decryption, communications. I mean, you think about what quantum does for communications. When you look at quantum entanglement, for example, boy, it's it's going to be right as we charge through the AI ML stuff. Then we're going to be confronted with quantum. So
I love it. I mean, honestly, that to me is one of the coolest, most incredible fields to even look at this point.
It's fascinating, and with all sorts of good news attached to it, and all sorts of challenges. Because the problem is, no matter what history has demonstrated, right? No matter what innovation comes out of mankind, it will be purposed for good. It will be purposed for bad,
of course,
and that is just the nature of the beast. And that's going to keep all of us talking about this and busy for quite a number of years. This problem is a long way from being in the box and under control.
It is. I do love. I know. We're getting near our time, but I do love your thoughts on thinking offensively for defense. Bringing in people that are extremely strong in offensive cybersecurity to be able to build defense because they understand the threat better than anyone, and that is like a key insight. Like I said, I've done several startups at this point, I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground knocking on doors, so I know it more than almost anybody else. Been in the dirt, and having that expertise is critical of knowing what you're selling and how it. And how what you're selling technology wise and how it makes it different, selling it to a CISO whose interests are very into, Dave just talked about compliance, right? And how do you sell a very technical solution to someone who's concerned about compliance and speaking to the board and risk and everything else?
Yep.
And it's, but I love that idea of the offense moving into the defense to build those solutions, because to me, I've seen it to where it's been very successful, and I've seen it to where it hasn't been that successful. So it's great to kind of hear your thoughts on that, to be honest.
Go ahead.
Even with the offense, you have to be careful. Sometimes you have to keep the barrier or the borders. Let's say.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I've been approached to do offensive work, and it's like that's no longer what I do.
Yeah,
and it's not what we're going to do, because it's that's a whole different path. And I like fly fishing.
and the offensive never ends, right?
Yeah.
You can set up your honeypots. And you can set up everything else to be able to detect. I get it, but once you start going across borders,
once you go active,
once you really start going active, it's a different animal, and also you're timing your resources at a point, right?
Yeah.
Most of these companies have limited staff, and they're trying to manage, like you talked about, a huge amount of systems. And I just got to tell one story. I walked into, I remember, a government organizations, and within their SOC. They have their IPS up, and they had like 11 million alerts posted scrolling down. And I said, how much 11 million, how much do you use paying attention to them? She goes, we don't even look at them. She goes, we just scroll them on the screen so it could look good when people come in and take a look at it. But we don't have the manpower to even look at any of this stuff. And it was kind of an eye opener for me of, that.
So there is no case open for any of the events?
They just pumped because it was too much. I mean, what are you going to do with several people, millions of alerts, and they have other jobs to be able to do? It's just, it was a big eye opener me for a lot of these organizations. The limitation of manpower, and then the multitude of threats coming out the door. How do they wisely spend their money? And it's a difficult job for a CISO. CISOs have a very, very difficult job.
Well,
I know.
I'll give you another transition, right? Is today we're overwhelmed with data. right?
Yes.
And this goes back to kind of open systems work I did a long time ago. The value proposition is to move from data to information to insights to knowledge.
Yes.
Right, that's the transition. And right now we're overwhelmed with data. The
Yes.
promise of AI and ML is to move us down that journey towards information, insights, and knowledge.
Yes.
That's the value proposition.
Yes.
But you have to create the borders again for even for that AI in order to
Absolutely.
not go out.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
definitely
and,
know.
and, and AI is not, AI, we're going to find some early AI use cases. There's going to be a whole bunch of failures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's going to be, when you look at tectonic shifts in innovation, they take time and they are a process. They are not a singularity, right? There'll be a few indicators of really compelling use cases, but then there'll be a lot of discovery over an extended period of time. And it won't be just the technical capabilities. It will be understanding how to use the technical capabilities and how to reshape processes and things like that. AI will take us down. Toffler wrote a book back in the 70s, about future shock, and AI is going to move us down that path in terms of mass customization, for example. But this requires entirely new thinking, new business systems, new processes. It's not just you plug the technology in the same old way of doing things and everything changes. There'll be some cases where it does, but those were use cases that were purpose built, waiting for this capability to become more efficient.
Yeah,
The
you're right.
really, really big use cases are going to be a process of evolution.
Yeah, it's gonna take time.
there was a report regarding AI in the internet, and in that report, the rate of failure was around from 88, but the average was 95, 96, but the maximum rate was 98, and I was impressed. Rate failure 98%. Wow. It's
Yep.
not okay at all. I mean, what means failures means he went outside of those borders, and that's why I'm afraid more of the AI. I mean, I'm not saying that it's our enemy at the moment. I say that it might be a friend for every one of us. It could help us in everything what we are doing. Could be HR, could be IT, could be whatever it is. But sometimes I don't know how he's thinking. He's smart than us, and sometimes might go out.
Well, look, I mean, if you want analogies, look at nuclear power.
Yeah, yeah.
I
You
mean,
you give a good example. Yeah,
yeah.
indeed.
Right.
So it's a lot of it comes down. There's a lot to be learned. There are a lot of challenges, and then it depends on whose hands it's in. So
Yeah.
at any rate,
All right, gentlemen, we're already at an hour 32. So, Bob, thank you so much for your time. This was
no, I enjoyed
fantastic.
the invite.
Really. Um, if you want to say anything more about the companies that you're dealing with, so people could actually go to them, um, we would love to hear it right now. So that'd be
Yeah,
fantastic.
look, I think for our foundry, which does our work in Maryland, cutting edge, starting one-of-one companies. That's datatribe.com. AllegisCyber is the foundation on the investment side. That's AllegisCyber.com. Look, I love talking to entrepreneurs who want to change the future. That's my bread and butter. And the bigger the ideas are, the crazier the ideas are, the more interested I'm likely to be.
Awesome.
Don't hesitate.
I love it. Well, go enjoy some fly fishing. Grab a bottle of your fantastic wine at your winery.
It's good stuff. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Real
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you.